My name is Michael Turner. I am from a small town in Ohio, and I have always believed one thing: greed may win battles, but truth wins wars. And on that day inside the bank, I was fighting for my life. My own son, standing tall in a pressed suit, was yelling at me across the counter, his voice sharp enough to cut the silence. "Just sign it, Dad." "Stop being stubborn," he shouted, slamming the papers in front of me. I clenched the pen, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from betrayal so deep it burned. "You don't even understand what's at stake here," he barked, his face flushed with frustration. Customers turned their heads. Some shook their heads as if they were watching a father being unreasonable. But no one knew the truth. No one knew that what he was demanding wasn't just a signature. It was my house, my savings, my future, everything I had built in 65 years of honest work. I locked eyes with him, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy who cried on my lap when he scraped his knees. And now that same boy, my own flesh and blood, had turned into a stranger who treated me like an obstacle in his way. He leaned closer, his voice dropping lower but his words carrying venom. "Dad, stop making this hard. You're old. You don't even need this money. You can barely walk some days. What are you holding on to?" Those words cut deeper than any knife. I could take insults from strangers, but from my son? From the boy I worked double shifts to send to college? From the boy who never went to bed hungry because I skipped meals just to make sure he ate? That was the fight I wasn't prepared for. The bank manager tried to calm the storm, but my son shoved past him, pointing a finger in my face. "Sign it now, or I swear you'll regret it. Don't make me drag this through court, because I will." The whole bank froze. Even the pens stopped scratching on paper. All eyes were on me, the old man at the counter, facing down his own blood. And in that moment, I wanted to shout back. I wanted to slam my fist and remind him of every sacrifice I ever made. But instead, I looked him straight in the eye and said softly, "A father's love isn't a blank check. You don't get to cash in on it whenever you want." He sneered, rolling his eyes, and pushed the documents closer. People might think this was just paperwork. But I knew if I signed, I would lose my home, the little farm I had left, and the last piece of dignity that kept me standing after my wife passed. Everything. All because of a son blinded by greed. As the tension rose, I slipped my hand under the counter, where I had tucked away a folded note before we walked into the bank. That note carried my last weapon. It was a desperate move, a father's final defense. And I prayed someone would see it before it was too late. "Do you even hear yourself?" I whispered, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "You're threatening the very man who raised you. Over money." He scoffed, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Raised me? You barely gave me anything. Do you think the world cares that you broke your back in some factory for pennies? That was your choice, not mine. And now you're standing in the way of something bigger. My business, my future, it all depends on this. You're selfish, Dad. Selfish." The words stung because they were laced with lies. I gave him everything I had, and somehow, in his twisted version of the story, I was the villain. Isn't that the cruelest thing about betrayal? It doesn't come from enemies, it comes from the ones you once would have died for. I wanted to crumble. I wanted to walk out. But I knew this wasn't just about me. If I gave in, I would be teaching him that manipulation wins, that threats can break the backbone of love, that parents are nothing more than stepping stones to be trampled on. And I couldn't let that lesson take root in him, no matter how much he hated me for resisting. He shoved the pen into my hand. "Sign it." His voice echoed, sharp, demanding, merciless. But instead of pressing ink to paper, I pressed the folded note into the manager's palm when my son wasn't looking. The manager's eyes flickered with confusion as he quickly unfolded it. I saw the subtle widening of his eyes when he read my words. That note carried the truth, every detail of the fraud my son was trying to pull, every warning I had prepared in case this moment came. And right there, in front of everyone, the balance began to shift. The manager's voice steadied as he said, "Sir, I think we need to pause this transaction." My son froze, his confidence cracking like thin glass. What? No, you can't pause this. It's legal. He's my father, he's supposed to sign for me. But it was too late. The truth was finally out of the shadows. And as the whispers spread across the bank, I realized something powerful. Sometimes we think silence protects peace, but in reality, silence only protects the liar. Speaking up, even if your voice shakes, is the only way to guard what matters most. So let me tell you, if you're watching this right now, if you've ever felt pressured, manipulated, or threatened into giving up what is rightfully yours, don't. Don't let anyone, even family, bully you into surrender. Love doesn't mean blind obedience. Respect doesn't mean silence. Stand up, even if you stand alone. Because in the end, what defines us is not what we gave away in fear, but what we held onto with courage. After that day at the bank, people might assume the fight began there, in that single heated moment when my son shoved papers in front of me. But the truth is, betrayals like this never start on the battlefield. They start in whispers, in subtle cracks that grow into canyons. I remember the first time I noticed something changing in him. His name is Andrew. When he was a boy, his laughter was the kind of sound that could heal me after the hardest day at work. I would come home exhausted from 12 hours at the factory, my hands blistered, my back screaming, but the moment I saw Andrew waiting at the window, his little arms waving, I felt alive again. He was my reason. My purpose. Everything I did was for him and his mother. But somewhere along the way, that sweet little boy began to fade, replaced by someone colder, sharper. It didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, like a slow leak in a roof you don't notice until the water stains appear on the ceiling. I saw the signs but convinced myself it was just growing pains. Maybe every teenager slams doors and rolls their eyes. Maybe every young man thinks his father doesn't understand. I told myself it was normal. But I'll never forget the first time he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not enough." It was after his college graduation. I had worked extra shifts, skipped meals, and sold my old pickup just to make sure he finished school without drowning in debt. I thought he would be grateful. Instead, as we sat down at dinner, I tried to give him advice about finding steady work. He leaned back, smirked, and said, "Dad, you wouldn't understand. You've worked the same dead-end job your whole life. You've never built anything. You've never been more than average." Average. That word stung like acid. I laughed it off that night, pretending the words didn't hurt. But deep down, something inside me cracked. I knew he saw me not as a father to be honored, but as a man to be dismissed. And once someone decides you're less, they start treating you like you're disposable. Still, I tried. I told myself, he's young. He'll grow out of it. I kept supporting him, cheering for him, even when he started chasing business schemes that collapsed one after another. I gave him loan after loan, even when I barely had enough for myself. Because that's what fathers do, right? We sacrifice, believing our children will one day look back and realize what it cost us. But instead of gratitude, Andrew grew hungrier. Entitled. He started calling me only when he needed money. He stopped visiting on holidays unless I hinted at a check waiting for him. And every time I hesitated, every time I suggested he stand on his own 2 feet, he would guilt me. "Do you want me to fail, Dad? Is that what you want? After everything I've sacrificed for you, you can't even help me now? Sacrificed for me?" The irony twisted like a knife. By the time his mother passed away, the distance between us had become a canyon. I needed comfort, but he gave me criticism. At the funeral, when people came up to tell me what a strong wife I had lost, Andrew pulled me aside and hissed, "You need to think about the estate. Don't get sentimental, Dad. We can use Mom's passing as leverage for the next business move." That was the moment I knew the boy I raised was gone. Still, nothing prepared me for the day he walked into my kitchen with a folder under his arm and said, "Dad, you're going to transfer everything into my name. It'll make life easier." His tone wasn't asking. It was commanding. When I said no, he slammed the folder shut and stormed out, muttering, "Fine." We'll do it the hard way. And that hard way led us straight into the bank, where he tried to corner me into signing it all away. You see, betrayal doesn't just happen. It builds. It festers. It grows in the dark. And by the time it surfaces, it's already too late to pretend it was just a misunderstanding. So let me tell you this: if you see the signs, don't ignore them. Don't excuse cruelty as immaturity. Don't write off manipulation as a phase. Love your children, yes, but love them enough to hold them accountable. Because a child who learns they can wound you without consequence will one day believe they can destroy you without remorse. That was the lesson I learned too late. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned that greed can dilute even the strongest bond until it feels like nothing but a stain. After my wife's death, I thought Andrew and I would lean on each other. I thought grief would soften his edges. But instead, it sharpened them. He saw her passing not as a loss, but as an opening. It started small. Phone calls late at night. His voice would always carry urgency, like the world would collapse if I didn't answer. Dad, I've got this opportunity. All I need is a quick 20 grand. Just a loan, I'll pay you back. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the boy I raised still carried a trace of honesty in his heart. But the repayments never came. Every promise turned into another excuse, another delay, another story about why the timing just wasn't right. At first, I told myself I was investing in him, in his dreams. But slowly I realized it wasn't about dreams. It was about dependency. He wasn't chasing visions. He was chasing shortcuts. He wanted the reward without the sweat, the prize without the race. And I had become his safety net, stretched thin and fraying with every fall. One evening, I found myself staring at the kitchen table, covered in bills and past due notices. My hands shook as I added up the numbers, realizing how much I had given away, how much of my own security had vanished into the black hole of Andrew's schemes. My house, my farm, my savings, it was all hanging by a thread. And still, the phone rang. Still, he demanded more. When I told him I couldn't keep doing it, he exploded. You're my father. If you don't help me, who will? You're supposed to care about my future. His words weren't a plea, they were an accusation, a weapon meant to pierce the armor of my love. I stood there, staring at the man he had become, and for the first time, I didn't recognize him. That night, I sat in the quiet of my home, and I realized something devastating: love can blind you. It can make you hand over pieces of yourself in the name of sacrifice, until you're nothing but a hollow shell. And the people who take advantage of that love, they never stop on their own. They stop only when you draw the line. The problem was, every time I tried to draw that line, Andrew erased it. One afternoon, he arrived at my doorstep in a brand new car, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good news, Dad. I'm finally onto something real. But I need your help one last time. I wanted to laugh at the phrase "one last time" because I had heard it so many times before. But then he slid the folder across the table, the same folder he would later shove in front of me at the bank. These are the transfer papers, he explained smoothly. We'll put the house and the land in my name. It'll make things easier for loans, investors, everything. Don't worry, you'll still live here. You won't even notice the difference. I stared at him, my heart pounding. He was asking me to sign away the silence in the bank after the manager spoke was heavier than any shout. For a split second, I saw my son's face twist, not with shame, not with guilt, but with raw panic. His plan had slipped through his fingers, and for the first time, the mask he wore so confidently began to crack. He stammered, trying to recover. You don't understand. This is all a misunderstanding. My father doesn't know what he's doing. He's confused. Confused. That word nearly broke me. Imagine raising a child, teaching him everything you know, only to hear him dismiss you as senile when you refuse to hand him your life's work. I wanted to shout, to defend my clarity, but before I could, the manager's voice cut through. Sir, we have documentation here that contradicts what your son is asking for. I'm afraid we'll need to halt this transaction until further review. The crowd of strangers in the bank began whispering. Some glanced at me with sympathy, others at Andrew with disgust. He hated that. He had always cared more about appearances than reality. I watched his jaw tighten as he realized the power was slipping away. And then, without warning, he turned on me in front of everyone. You think you're clever, don't you, old man? Always trying to make me look like the bad guy. You don't care about me. You never have. The words rang out, sharp and cruel. People gasped. Some shook their heads. A woman near the counter muttered, "That's no way to talk to your father." But Andrew didn't care. His voice kept rising, fueled not by truth, but by the desperation of a man caught in his own lies. In that moment, I didn't see my son anymore. I saw a man drowning, clawing at anyone he could to keep from sinking, even if it meant dragging me under with him. And for the first time in my life, I understood that I couldn't save him, not from his choices, not from his greed, not from himself. The manager stepped in, firm but calm. I'm going to ask you both to leave until this matter can be sorted with legal counsel. Andrew stormed out first, slamming the glass doors so hard they rattled. I followed slowly, each step heavier than the last. My heart felt torn in two, half of it mourning the son I once knew, the other half bracing for the war that I knew wasn't over. Outside, the air was sharp, and so were his words. He spun on me, eyes blazing. You'll regret this, Dad. You think this is over? You're wrong. I'll take everything, one way or another. Then he walked away, leaving me standing there on the sidewalk, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. I wish I could tell you I went home and shook it off. But I didn't. That night, I sat in the empty house, staring at the chair where his mother used to sit, and I cried. Not the quiet tears of a man who's tired, but the loud, broken sobs of a father who realizes his child has become a stranger. I cried for the little boy who used to hold my hand. I cried for the young man who once promised he'd make me proud. And I cried for myself, for the years I spent believing love alone was enough to keep a family whole. But in that darkness, something else stirred inside me, resolve. For too long, I had let guilt and fear chain me down. I had let Andrew dictate the terms of our relationship, making me feel as if saying no was a betrayal. But that night, I realized the real betrayal wasn't my resistance, it was his exploitation. And if I kept surrendering, I would only be feeding the fire that was burning him alive. So I made a choice. I would fight not with fists, not with shouting, but with truth. I would no longer let him rewrite the story of who I was or what I had built. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let greed erase it all. The days after the bank incident felt heavier than years. It wasn't just the humiliation of being attacked by my own son in front of strangers, it was the silence that followed. For the first time, the phone stopped ringing. There were no desperate calls for money, no hollow promises of one last chance. And in that silence, I found both peace and dread. Peace, because I wasn't being hounded. Dread, because silence is never empty, it's a storm building quietly, waiting to strike. I knew Andrew. He was not the kind of man to accept defeat. If he couldn't win with charm, he would win with threats. If he couldn't win with persuasion, he would try force. One evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hands. The sun dipped low, and the fields that had carried my sweat for decades glowed gold in the light. I thought about the countless mornings I rose before dawn, the countless nights I fell asleep with aching bones, all to protect this land. This home was more than property, it was memory. It was the laughter of a boy chasing fireflies, the smell of my wife's pies cooling on the windowsill, the creak of the old rocking chair by the fireplace. And the thought of it slipping away because of my son's greed, it lit a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. So I made a decision: if Andrew wanted to turn this into a war, I wouldn't face it unarmed. The very next morning, I walked into the law office downtown, a place I had avoided for most of my life. I wasn't the type of man who trusted lawyers, but I knew I couldn't fight this alone. The attorney, a young woman named Claire, listened quietly as I laid out everything, every loan I had given Andrew, every broken promise, every scheme. Her eyes softened as I spoke, but her tone remained sharp. "Mr. Turner," she said, "what your son is trying to do borders on financial exploitation. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. We'll protect your rights. Her words were like a bomb, but also a sting. Protect your rights. I had lived so long putting others before myself that I had forgotten I even had rights. For years, I believed that love meant surrender, that sacrifice meant silence. But sitting in that office, I realized love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's destruction. Still, walking out of that building, my chest felt heavy. Because behind all the legal terms and protective measures, the truth remained, I wasn't just fighting a case. I was fighting my son. And no matter how justified I was, the thought of dragging him into court, of airing our family wounds for the world to see, made my heart ache. That night, I wrestled with my conscience. I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, trying to write down my thoughts, but all that came out were questions. Where did I go wrong? Could I have raised him differently? Did my sacrifices spoil him instead of strengthening him? A father is supposed to be a guide, but somewhere along the road, I lost him. And the guilt of that loss pressed on me like a weight I could barely carry. Yet, as the clock ticked past midnight, I remembered the faces at the bank. Strangers who looked at me with pity, yes, but also with something else, recognition. Some nodded as if they had seen the same battles in their own lives. Parents manipulated by children. Friends betrayed by those they trusted most. And I realized it wasn't just about me anymore. If I let Andrew take everything, if I surrendered in silence, I wouldn't just be losing my home. I would be setting an example that it's okay to let greed win, that it's okay to let love be twisted into a weapon. And I couldn't let that message stand. Not for me. Not for him. Not for anyone who might be watching. So I steadied myself. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a fighter. And I knew the battle ahead would test me in ways I had never imagined. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready. The day of the hearing arrived with skies as gray as my heart. I walked into the courthouse with my cane in one hand and a folder of documents in the other. The weight of those papers was nothing compared to the weight on my chest. These weren't just contracts or evidence. They were pieces of my life, every sacrifice, every broken promise, every scar that love had left behind. Andrew was already there, sitting tall in his sharp suit, his eyes narrowed like a wolf circling its prey. He didn't even look at me as I entered. Instead, he smirked, tapping his pen against the table, as if the whole thing was already won. He leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something that made them both chuckle. That sound cut through me sharper than any insult. When the judge called us to order, I stood slowly, every bone in my body screaming with age but my spirit burning steady. Andrew's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of me as an old man slipping into confusion, incapable of handling my own affairs. They spoke of opportunity, of how Andrew was only trying to secure his father's future. And for a moment, I watched heads in the room nod as if their story made sense. Then it was my turn. My lawyer, Claire, guided me to the stand, but once I was there, I waved her aside. "I'll speak for myself," I said, my voice trembling but clear. The judge gave me a nod, and I took a deep breath. "I may be old," I began, "but I am not confused. I may walk slower than I used to, but my mind and my memory are sharper than ever when it comes to what I've lived for. I worked 40 years in a factory, day and night, so my son could have more than I ever did. I bled for that boy. I starved so he could eat. I gave up dreams so he could chase his own. And now, he stands here, not out of love, not out of care, but out of greed." The courtroom was silent except for the echo of my words. I could feel Andrew shifting uncomfortably behind me, but I didn't turn. I kept going. "You want to know the truth?" I said, holding up the note I had hidden at the bank that day. "This is the note I wrote, because I knew deep down I couldn't trust my own son to protect me. I had to protect myself. Do you know what it feels like to raise a child you would have died for, only to realize he'd rather see you broken than see you safe? It's a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone." My voice cracked then, not from weakness, but from truth. I let the silence hang heavy, let the words seep into every corner of that room. Andrew shot up, his face red with fury. "He's lying. He's twisting everything. He just doesn't want me to succeed because he's bitter and jealous. His words spilled out like poison, desperate and wild. But this time, people weren't nodding. They were shaking their heads. They had heard enough. They had seen enough. The mask had fallen. The judge raised a hand, silencing him. Then her voice rang clear. "Mr. Turner, the court recognizes your autonomy and your right to your property. These documents will remain in your possession. This case is dismissed." The gavel struck, and with it, the weight I had carried for years finally lifted. Andrew stormed out without looking back. Part of me wanted to chase after him, to beg him to remember the boy he once was. But another part of me knew that wasn't my battle anymore. Sometimes love means holding on. Other times, it means letting go. And that day, I let him go. I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, the folder still in my hands. I had my home. I had my dignity. But more importantly, I had my truth. And no one could take that from me again. That night, as I sat alone in the house that had once been filled with laughter, I felt both sorrow and strength. Sorrow for the son I had lost to greed. Strength because I had finally drawn the line. And I knew maybe for the first time that I had done the right thing. So if you're listening to me now, hear this: don't let anyone, child, spouse, friend, or stranger, make you believe that love means surrender. Love is not slavery. Respect is not silence. You have the right to protect what you've worked for, what you've built, and who you are. And if someone tries to strip that from you, even if it's your own blood, stand up. Speak out. Protect yourself. Because in the end, it is better to lose someone to greed than to lose yourself to silence. That is my story. That is my truth. And if even one person hears it and finds the courage to say no when it matters most, then every tear, every heartbreak, every scar, it was worth it. Remember, this family isn't defined by blood alone. Family is defined by love, respect, and trust. And when those things are missing, you must stand firm, no matter how hard it hurts. Because the truth is this: greed may win battles, but truth wins wars. Always.